You're listening to a social justice podcast, an exploration of our world's social issues, hosted by NICOLA SPURLIng on the traditional and unceded territories of the Kwikwetlem, Katzie, and Qayqayt peoples.
Hello, this is a social justice podcast. I'm your host, NICOLA SPURLIng, and today I'm joined by Ky Sargeant. Ky, can you introduce yourself, please?
Hello, my name is Ky Sargeant. I use the pronouns she, her, or they, them. I used to do, and I still do, a lot of equity and inclusion education, but lately I have been shifting my focus a lot towards stand-up comedy, where I perform under the name K. And I have been doing stand-up now for, it's getting close to 3 years. I hosted a monthly open mic for queer and trans folks. I perform regularly around, all the Pride events and just places around Vancouver. But the coolest thing that I think I've done in the stand-up world is I hosted a all trans femme comedy night. So all the comedians were trans femme. It was the first time that had ever been done in Canada, which I didn't know until I'd put it together and tried to see if anyone else had done it. And turns out they hadn't. And we sold out twice. We sold out so well that the venue gave us a second showtime later in the night, and then we sold out that one as well. And so, huge demand for trans comedy, apparently.
Yeah, that's such a huge accomplishment. Congratulations on that.
Yeah, it was fun. It was a great night. It was an awesome, awesome show.
I really wish I could have made it. I remember hearing about it ahead of time, and I can't remember exactly what I had booked that night, but I was so disappointed I couldn't make it. So I'm looking forward to when you do the next one.
Absolutely. There are more coming. The next one I think is going to be in October. I'm doing one called Dolls and Dykes for mixing up some trans femmes and some trans masks up in the lineup. So I really wanted to create a space that was very trans forward, where I know there's a lot of queer comedy spots where you'll get a lot of cis gay and cis lesbian and bisexual comics, but I was like, hey, I want all my comics to be trans. I want all of them to be trans.
Well, I feel like we'll get into this a little bit later, but people might be surprised to hear about trans people participating in comedy, because I think there's this perception, particularly from people who've never met a trans person, that trans people are offended by all comedy or something along those lines, right? So, I said, we'll get into that a little bit later, but first of all, I just want to have a conversation about how you became involved in comedy in the first place.
Yeah, so I have always been, I wouldn't say in theater, but I've always been theater adjacent, where in high school, I got into improv comedy just for fun, because I had some friends doing it, and I ended up doing improv comedy for 4 years, participating in improv competitions when I was there. And then I eventually moved to Vancouver, where I took a bit of a back seat in some of the performance things. Eventually I picked up spoken word poetry in and around the pandemic and just before the pandemic. And though I still love poetry, it holds a special place in my heart, I was finding it really difficult to even my poetry was oftentimes funny. And I was reaching a point in my life where I wanted to be on stage telling stories that weren't making people feel or cry or have those really strong emotions. I actually wanted to make people laugh. I wanted to be in spaces where I could tell my stories, I could tell jokes, I could share things throughout my lived experience, and have the crowd get feel enjoyment and joy out of that. I started writing a lot of comedy, started performing comedy to my couch in the pandemic. I wrote a lot through the pandemic. And then I came out, and I've kind of done my comedy career very backwards, where usually if you ask most comics, how do you get into comedy? They will tell you to get into the open mic circuit, get on stage, bomb 700 times, and eventually you'll get good enough and you'll figure your way out, and then you'll start getting booked. I went the complete opposite route, where I practiced at home. I got really good at home. And I immediately came out and kind of met people who were looking for hosts and comedians that weren't really in the comedy scene. For example, Pride is not in the comedy scene, but they're looking for comedians. And so I ended up getting booked right away from folks that just knew me and believed that I could do it. And then I did, and I did very well. And I went to a couple open mics, and the culture of the open mic was just, it's very bro-y. We can talk a little bit more about the open mic culture, because it's kind of why I started my own open mic, to kind of get away from that. And I think that'll be the large topic of the conversation today. And so I started my own open mic. And so I've kind of created like a parallel comedy scene next to the Vancouver comedy scene on my own. And now I'm circling back for like, okay, I really gotta like actually make the connections that I need to like really, if I want to take my comedy career further, I have to like be part of it, right? I gotta be in the scene for all of its good and all of its bad. I gotta like actually work with the community and be with the community and then figure out where that's going. So that's kind of where I'm going in now. Now I'm getting booked on like the more like conventional shows, the established shows, and building my network from there. But yeah, that's a brief touch on how I got into comedy.
Yeah, that's amazing. I feel like a lot of people don't hear that story, right? It is sort of, you're going to a lot of these comedy shows and you're bombing, and it takes a decade, and then eventually you start making a bit of money, and
I hate it. I hate that story, I think that story is a trap. Like, I really do. I mean, it works for some people, but I think it's a story that is forced on people because most comedians aren't thinking of any other way, right? They're not really, there's such a pressure in comedy to do things the one way that it's always been done, and if you don't, there's a bit of like a gatekeeping kind of culture. Comedy is a very bro-y place. It tends to be where, so there's a lot of gatekeepers. You've got to like impress people, and so the only way to do that is to just keep going out, keep putting your face in places, keep doing like slots for no money, and then just slowly building up a name for yourself. And I don't think that is necessarily the best way to do it. It is the conventional way to do it, but I don't think you're not going to get paid for a while.
Well, I feel like part of it might have to do with the mentorship aspect. I know a lot of comedians get a mentor, and that person would have started their comedy in a completely different environment, and so they're learning from someone who's maybe not with the times per se. And also, like, social media has a huge influence. I noticed that you're posting a lot on social media. Is that one of the ways that you are reaching your audience?
No.
Okay.
It's not, but I hope it will be. I have a lot of animosity towards social media. I have a very challenging relationship to social media because I am personally not an online person. Like, I would rather not be online ever. I would rather like never be online and just live my life offline and enjoy myself and really be off my phone. Like, I relish the days where I can turn my phone off for like a week and go camping and just not have to touch it. But the reality of being an artist in 2024, or just like doing anything in 2024, is you have to have social media. Like, it's the way in which people are finding each other. It's the way in which things are being communicated. And so I'm in an interesting point in my journey with it, of like trying to stop saying like I hate social media and trying to start realizing that it is just like a medium that I have to like learn to deal with, and whether I hate it or not, that's the paradigm that we're working with as artists, especially when now grant funding is asking you for like, what's your follower count, right? It's wild.
And is there a specific type of comedy that you specialize in?
I'm interestingly in like a transition period with my comedy where originally I was doing a lot of kind of storytelling. I would share a lot of like personal experiences, experiences with my family, experiences. It's all of it is very trans joy centered. I would say that prior to right now, and still very much, my central theme in my writing is and will always be the celebration of the trans experience, and like how hilarious the trans experience is, because it is a ridiculous experience to go through. Like, to walk through the world as a trans person and to see the ways that gender is pressed upon me and pressed upon everyone else, and the ways that I can see how people have to press themselves into their gender boxes that I don't feel as confined to because I've kind of stepped out of that. Like, it is a very interesting, as a comedian, for me, like, the role of the comedian is to kind of poke holes in the fabric of like reality for people. And as a trans comedian, I think I can do that so well with just like how weird life and gender really is if you take a step back. But I think given the political and social context that we're moving into, I am pivoting a little bit to do less like personal storytelling, and to do more political comedy. Like I want to write more political comedy, very very similar to like I think people like Bassem Youssef does like amazing political comedy, around like the war in Gaza. Also like Jon Stewart in the US. Like I would like my kind of long-term goal is to eventually do like a Jon Stewart style daily show, but like weekly show.
I used to want to do that as well.
Exactly. Like that's kind of where I would love to go, because I think that one of the things we fail very hard in Canada to do is we don't communicate politics to the people, right? It's very hard,
or at least not in an accessible way, right?
Yeah, not in an accessible way. And so I think that that's kind of the direction that I'd love to go, is be able to bring more of the Canadian political context to people in like an accessible way, like through comedy, commenting on things like the Olympic kerfuffle. Like there's so much comedy in that for how like atrocious that whole debacle was, right? So like things like that, where I think that previously I was trying to make comedy that would make everyone laugh no matter what. I didn't want to rock the boat. And now I'm at the point where I'm like, no, the boat needs to be rocked. Like the boat really does need to be rocked.
Yeah.
And I want to rock it in a fun way.
Well, that's one of the things that I really enjoy about different John, but John Oliver, because he does these really deep dives into political stories. And I think a lot of times when comedians try to approach politics, they're just taking these sort of surface level jokes, and they're not really giving the audience an understanding. And it's not necessarily a comedian's job to give people a deep understanding of politics. But one of the things that I appreciate about him is that by using comedy to bring attention to these issues and doing them in an in-depth way, it really makes people gain a really good understanding of what's happening in the world around them.
No, I agree. And like definitely would love to like be able to do some more of that. Like if I could eventually grow into a point where I had the capacity to do John Oliver style investigative reporting and then bring that into the Canadian context, I would love to. I've got a couple projects to get off the ground first. I think once I build my like self and my following and just build my even just my experience, right, as a comedian for a little while, I think in the next few years I'm gonna try to like shift into the Jon Stewart / John Oliver style of like late night comedy, because I love that. Like I watch so much of it. It is a lot of my comedic style, like on stage style, is informed by folks like them.
And I mean, as much as they are amazing, to have someone who's not a cis white man doing it is going to be amazing as well, right?
Yeah.
And I guess along those lines, you work in DEI and you're an activist and you're a comedian, and we talked a little bit before about how some people might not think that a trans person would be involved in comedy, and that combination of things might be viewed as sort of unusual, or maybe they don't fit together. But do you think that the various work that you do is at odds with each other in any way, or does that all kind of mesh together really well?
Absolutely not. So I teach like workshops, right? Like equity and inclusion workshops, like Trans 101, Neurodiversity 101, stuff like that. And I say that work is basically just comedy disguised as education. And in my comedy, I'm basically doing education disguised as comedy, right? Because very much the art of both facilitation and of comedy, the crux of it is maintaining the tension of a room. And putting a framework out there and helping to guide an audience through a topic or through something, and then landing the plane on the other side in a way where the audience has now come to a new understanding of something. And at least that's the way I understand comedy, right? Like there's a lot of different types of comedy. There's like just slapstick, like people will say, comedy is just about making people laugh. And to some extent, like it is. But for me, I think the real gem that comedy brings is it really does allow you to bring people through an idea. And when they land on the other side of that idea and they're laughing about it, that's how you know that they've kind of internalized what you had to say. That's how you know that they really listened to you, is they're laughing, because clearly they heard it, they digested it, and it was funny, and now they like are gonna stick with that for like forever, right? So
And we kind of had this conversation. We volunteer on the parade working group for Vancouver Pride together, and we were having a conversation about your work in DEI, and you were talking about how some people, when you try to educate them or you try to correct them, they sort of get a little bit on edge. They don't want to receive that criticism, and they push back against it. But if you approach it in a comedic way, or you open those doors in other ways, that you're able to reach those people more effectively. So that's really interesting to hear that you see comedy and that DI work in sort of the same light.
I think the best facilitators and more facilitators and educators need to really ask themselves, are people having fun in their workshops? Are people enjoying themselves in their workshops? I think that's a question, and I think it's changing. I think a lot of folks in the facilitation world are doing really great work. Like I know, like everyone knows Adrienne Marie Brown and the work that she's been doing in this space around like, joy activism. But I really think that if you are delivering an education session about a DEI topic and people on the other side of the table are not smiling by the end, you probably haven't really landed somewhere. Like you might have given them information for their mind, but that's not going to go anywhere. I did a lot of research into like what really works in the DEI sphere. And one of the challenges with DEI is you've kind of got a few reactions to it. You get the people who don't want to learn. And if you try to give them information that conflicts with their personal beliefs or their personal views, you'll actually send them the opposite way. You'll get backlash. People will come out of your workshop worse than when they came in because they just disagreed with you and you never gave them a reason to agree with you. And so they think of you as even worse. Then there are the people who like, no, oh, I should learn this. I should be here. Like, this is good. I know it's good, but I'm not like interested. And then you give them all this information and then they're going to like, they're ticking the boxes. They're like, yes, I've been in this training. Yes, I've done that. It's in my head. And then they're going to walk out the door and they're going to forget all of it. Right. And it's not actually going to change their behavior. The only way to really inspire behavioral change is you have to inspire people. You have to like, that's like, you have to do art. You have to inspire people to like really think about like, wow, that's really amazing. Like, I really think that I can be a catalyst for change in my society. I really think that I can like make a difference. And this experience has really showed me like what the next steps to making a difference is and what I can do. And then they go out in the world and then they're thinking about that, So that's comedy, but it is like facilitation.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I guess coming back to more traditional comedy or established comedians, they'll often claim that political correctness is ruining comedy. And I wonder if there's an element to that. Obviously, you're able to find ways of incorporating comedy into DEI work and using comedy to educate people and talk about political subjects and all of these really positive things that I think help push like social change. But do you think there is an element of, I guess, political correctness or social justice ruining comedy in some way? Or is that just a matter of comedians not being able to figure out how to be funny without insulting people?
Yeah, no, those people who say that anyone who says that political correctness is ruining comedy is a hack comedian. And I will go on record to say that forever. Anthony Jeselnik, who is a very dark comedian, who is does jokes, very, very dark, edgy jokes. Anthony Jeselnik said, and I think he's quoting Andy Warhol in this, art is about getting away with it, And if you can't get away with the things that you're saying without backlash, like, you're not getting away with it. Especially comedy, of all things, is an art form that is about making the audience gets to decide what's funny, right? Mm-hmm. And so if the audience doesn't, if you're losing your audience and you're losing the public opinion, you're not getting away with it. And you need to reevaluate what you're saying and what you're doing. And I think when people say, I did a lecture about kind of the different types of comedy and power in comedy. When people say that political correctness is ruining comedy, what they're really saying is that they can no longer rely on inaccurate stereotypes to make jokes. Mm-hmm. Because what anti-PC comedy is really just using a collection of stereotypes as your foundation to build punchlines off of. Stereotypes like, people of color are lazy, or trans people are men, or women are dumb, or like whatever your stereotype is, these things that are not actually true, but we have like a social stereotype of this idea. And then a comedian knows the stereotype and writes a joke where the punchline of it reinforces the stereotype at the end of the day. And that's why people get offended, because people who live that life, who know that the stereotype is not true, it offends them, because you're just sharing misinformation at this point, right? And that's the problem, where people are saying like, oh, PC's ruining comedy. It's like, no, because you're the fundamental like foundation of your joke is built on misinformation. It's built on misinforming the public of like inaccurate and harmful stereotypes. And if you actually spoke truth, right, you can use comedy to speak truth to power. And I feel like I'm rambling a little bit, but I feel like people like Dave Chappelle, I'm the most like disappointed in, because Dave Chappelle, if you listen to his old stuff, like he used comedy to speak truth to power, right? The truth of the Black experience to power. Like Dave Chappelle was so good at being able to highlight the truth of the Black experience in a way that counteracted the narrative of like racialized power in the US, and that was what made him so good. And now he's coming on the other side and using stereotypes of trans people to basically spread misinformation. And assuming that, I think he has a very misguided understanding that where he believes that like as a Black person punching up at trans people is like punching up. Like I think he has this like weird kind of view that he's still punching up because trans people are somehow more privileged than Black people, because he doesn't understand like that's not how it works at all. Like I think that's his like where his head is at from what I've seen and read in his comedy. And so that's the challenge of it. But
I wonder how much of that is that comedians who are established, they have been through maybe decades of telling jokes, and jokes that used to land with an audience 20, 30, 40 years ago, they don't land with audiences the same way these days, because we know more. Like we know those stereotypes aren't true in a way that maybe people back then didn't know that those stereotypes weren't true. And so they've stopped being funny, because we realize this is just perpetuating harm towards a community. Yeah. How much of comedy today do you think we're going to look back on in 20, 30, 40 years and say, wow, that was really inappropriate? Do you worry about that in your own comedy, where you go, this joke that I'm telling maybe isn't going to fly in 20, 30 years? Or are you really careful to try to stay away from jokes that might not age well?
I think because I approach comedy in such a fundamentally different way than a lot of these comedians, I have no concerns that any of my material is going to like age badly, because my material is very much a reflection of my experience in a point in time, right? When you write a joke that punches down, like the term that we use is like whether we're punching down or we're punching up, right? If you're writing a joke about a person, a marginalized community, or even just about another person, you're punching down. You're using the stereotype as the punchline of the joke. Matt Rife got a lot of flack, who's a comedian. Matt Rife got a lot of flack because he wrote a joke about that. Basically, the punchline of the joke was there was a woman with a black eye, and she got that black eye because she couldn't cook well. She was just a bad cook in the house, and so that's why she got the black eye. And so the stereotype that's being reinforced there is that women deserve domestic abuse if they cannot perform household tasks, right? That's the stereotype. And when you're punching down like that, sure that can be funny because people can laugh, but ultimately what you're doing is you're reinforcing the stereotype that is wrong. It's very superficial. The joke is only funny as long as you stay at a very superficial level, right? Because if you think about that joke at any degree, if you actually try to think about why that joke was funny, you will feel uncomfortable at what you just kind of thought about yourself. You would be uncomfortable with that reality, that why you're laughing at this. Whereas if you're punching up, and I think Hannah Gatsby does this really well in Nanette, when you punch up and you talk about a structure or a system, if you are a queer person or a trans person making comedy about transphobia, you are actually innately, in order to be funny, you have to be insightful, you have to provide information to the audience that they don't see typically, because that's how you like break the illusion of what the reality is. And that's insightful. Like, you're literally seeing into the system, right? You're on the outside, you're a marginalized person on the outside of the social circle, and you can see what other people are living in, and you can see the disparity of how other people live and how you live. And the joke can comment on that, and that breaks, and that's what, when people laugh, that's them recognizing the truth of your lived experience versus the thing that they assumed about trans people, or the thing that they assumed about Black people, or the thing that they assumed. Now you've revealed the real truth, and now they have to sit with that, and that makes them laugh, right? The ridiculousness of life.
Right. And I guess that's sort of the difference of, you're not making jokes about a marginalized community, but you can make jokes that include marginalized communities.
Absolutely.
Like, you can make jokes about, I saw one recently that was about blackface and how, that's not okay. But if you're in the Navy SEALs, then like maybe it's okay. Right. And all these Black people are sharing it on TikTok right now, killing themselves laughing over this joke that a white person told about Black people, but it wasn't done in a way that was making fun of Black people. And I think that that's the difference that was being made there.
Well, and I think that is an example where the vast majority of people are not going to consume comedy at like this highly intellectual level, right? They're going to see a thing and it's going to make them laugh, or not make them laugh, right? For something like that, the idea of blackface, right? There is a lot of historical context to blackface, right? There's a lot of stereotypes associated with blackface about what blackface is, the minstrelsy, making fun of Black people. That's the stereotype. But the truth, like true reality, is that people who do paint their faces black in the Navy SEALs do it for a good reason. They do it for like the military. That's true reality. And that's when the truth of like what, like capital T truth, is in conflict with the stereotype. And that is where the laughter comes from. It's that recognition of like, oh yeah, the real world is actually broader than these stereotypes that we live in. That these stories we tell ourselves, and that creates the comedy. So when you're saying like you can tell jokes about like with people from marginalized communities, you can tell jokes about trans people, you can tell jokes about Black people, you can tell jokes about Asian people, you can tell these jokes. You just need to recognize like what is the reveal? What are you revealing? Is the thing that you're revealing something grounded in a true reality for these people, or is it a stereotype that isn't true, but it's funny because it's untrue, right? Where for a lot of folks, you see this in like conservatism, this idea of like nostalgia, of like making America great again, or going back to this idealized past, is that for a lot of these people, political correctness or just like progressive movements are really shattering a lot of these truths, fake truths that they've been holding their whole lives. That, the idea that like Canada or America is a fundamentally just place, the idea that you can like meritocracy, the idea that you can just work hard and you will succeed in life, all of these myths that are totally untrue. Right now that we know our history, we know that we're founded on like very colonial genocidal acts. And the more people try to be like, this is the truth, the more they want the safety of those old stories, and the more they want comedians and stories that reinforce their existing beliefs. And why when a political correct comedian comes up and tells a joke that makes them think about the fact that they're living on stolen land, they don't like that feeling and they want to run away from it. It's not funny anymore because now I have to think about my life.
Right. I have to reconcile that. I mean, I think like 20 years ago, some of the jokes that were circulating around the schoolyard the most were ones about how Mexicans couldn't afford to support their families. And, you think back to that and you're going, what the heck were people thinking spreading these jokes around? Because literally what you're doing is making fun of people being discriminated against, not able to find adequate employment. And instead of making fun of the people that are preventing them from getting that adequate employment, you're making fun of them for not being able to access it. Like, that's such a fucked up thing to do, right? Like, what?
Yeah.
Is that?
It's because it's easy. It's easy to rely on stereotypes, and this is why I also call like a lot of the people who hate PC comedy, why I call them hack comedians, is because the job's gotten harder. The art has gotten a lot more difficult. And if you can't make people laugh without making fun of like a marginalized community, you're not good at your job. You're relying on a crutch, and your crutch is you have to offend people to make them laugh, or you have to offend like a group of people to make a second group of privileged people laugh at their expense. Right? If you can't write a joke that people on both sides of the aisle can laugh at because it is like fundamentally a good joke rather than just relying on the stereotype of misinformation, like you're not doing the job of a comedian, at least not of a good comedian.
Right. And what do you think of someone like Russell Peters, for instance, who kind of creates a career around insulting everyone? And I guess the logic is, well, I'm making fun of everyone and I'm not singling out specific groups of people, and therefore that's okay. And also I am, in some way from a marginalized community, and therefore it's okay for me to do it where it might not be okay for someone else to do it.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of skill. I think Russell Peters, I haven't followed much of his comedy recently, so I don't know, I don't know if he's made any jokes about like queer or trans people that I would need to like go and reevaluate my opinion of.
I'm not sure either.
But like at least in terms of like his work and his material on race and racial dynamics, I mean, a lot of it does, from what I remember, a lot of it draws from his personal experience as a racialized person. A lot of the stereotypes that he is leveraging are stereotypes that he himself sees and faces and works with and navigates every day. And so when he's calling attention to those things, and also the thing that makes Russell Peters like just really funny is he's got great craft, right? His voice work is really good, his accents are really good, like,
and I guess Gabriel Iglesias would be in a similar
Gabriel Iglesias in the similar phase, where a lot of the reason why they are as funny as they are is not necessarily the writing, although they are good comedians, but a lot of what makes them so funny is the craft they have of the theatrics, if to put it in no other way, is like they have great craft. They can really pull people into a world, right? They can pull people into a story with the voices. Gabriel Iglesias is a good example of someone who actually, like, almost all of his material is personal storytelling.
Right.
Like, almost all of his material is storytelling. And yes, there's people of different races in those stories, but he's not using any stereotypes of these people. He's actually telling the story of real people and what really happened in his experiences. And he's using like voices and theatrics to amp up the comedy, to make the comedy more exciting and more immersive, right?
And I guess when he does his like, he has a racist gift basket skit that he tells, right? And it's his black friend, and they get him a racist gift basket and deliver it to his room and pretend they're the Chamber of Commerce and all of this. And I guess that one works because, one, it's his personal experience, and two, it's a friend of his who was okay with the joke and who comes on stage with him to also help tell his side of the story during the joke, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is what I mean. Like, there are ways you can do this that don't involve like relying on misinformation, right? I think that really comes when I keep going back to this idea of stereotypes and misinformation, is because we live in a world with enough information now that we know what is wrong, we know what is like literally incorrect. And when you go on stage, like someone like Ricky Gervais goes on stage and talks like shit about trans people, and says things like, we know that scientifically he is incorrect. He is just wrong. And so that's why if he goes on and he's telling this, there's a responsibility element where there's millions of people that are going to watch this stuff. And the vast majority of these people aren't going to go fact check you. They're not going to like go and actually look up, is like the things you're saying actually true, right? He's always saying, oh, it's a joke, it's not serious. I'm like, yeah, but it is serious, because that's the responsibility that you have as an artist. And if I have a really personal pet peeve of people who find themselves in positions of power and privilege typically white, cis white men who find themselves in positions of power and privilege and then try to act as if like it's just like their opinion and it's their voice and it's like no one else should have to, like, it's their opinion, they shouldn't need to like have to censor themselves for anybody. And I'm like, yeah, but you have like 1 million people listening to you. And those people aren't, like, for them to be like, well, that's their responsibility to do their own research is so childishly selfish. It's so like childishly arrogant to the reality of like, that's just not how people engage with media. And you know that, but you just don't want to like sit with the reality that you should use your privilege for like the well-being of society. And for you, it's easier to just like go up on stage and do whatever you want. And, you know?
Yeah. And you've mentioned two people that I wanted to bring up in my next question, because I find like Dave Chappelle, Ricky Gervais, they tell some very distasteful anti-trans jokes. And at the same time, they also have jokes that are, you know, I would say probably objectively funny. Right?
Yes.
So do you think that it's possible to enjoy artwork that's created by someone you're offended by? Or does the offensive nature of some of their work tarnish the rest of it?
This like idea of like objectively funny, because
I mean, I know, I guess subjectively funny. I should
no,
like...
but you're right when I think when you say objectively funny, when people say objectively funny, what they mean
most
is
people would laugh at it.
Yeah. But I think what is really being said with that term, objectively funny, and I know this because I did a workshop, or I did a lecture about this topic specifically. And in that lecture, I talked about how the technique of comedy, because all a joke is, like, what is a joke? A joke is a setup where I build tension, and then I give you I give you a premise, I set the joke up, so I build a tension, and then I give you a punchline and I release the tension. It's just a wave of tension in the audience. Hannah Gadsby talks about this a lot. The technique of comedy is this wave. And when you can do this wave well, as you are, like, I don't want to say that like people like Ricky Gervais and Dave Chappelle are bad comedians necessarily, in the sense that they have so much experience with the craft, is they know what makes a joke funny. They know the technique, right? They're very great craftsmen, right? They know how to craft a joke. They know how to like manipulate the energy of a room to get a laugh. And so when you say like these people have like objectively funny jokes, it's like, of course they have objectively funny jokes, because that they're phenomenally experienced comedians. They have so much experience. Whether or not like the issue comes in when they start using the technique of comedy for ill reasons, right? When they're using the same technique to make people laugh, is now using that technique to make people laugh at the expense of other people, right? And that's the difficulty of that, right? And I don't know, you know, I'm not Ricky Gervais's psychologist or Dave Chappelle's psychologist. Like, I could speculate a lot about like their internal ideologies of how they see the world. Like, I personally think that for a lot of these rich white comedians, is even like Ricky Gervais, you know, if you think about his early career in The Office, it was really kind of like a firebrand of like critiquing the ridiculousness of office culture and like office politics and how dumb that was. And I think he's gotten to a point now where, I mean, if we think about the narratives for a lot of like cis white comedians, is the space that they occupy in like our larger social narrative is shrinking, because they used to have all of it and now they have some of it, most of it still, but it is shrinking because we have new voices coming out. And so the ways in which that people like Ricky Gervais used to be able to provide really insightful commentary on the human experience is less valuable now, when the people who are giving like the real insights to the human experience are, you know, the trans people, are the people of color, black people, indigenous people, right? We are the people who now have the platform to really showcase and really comment on the power structures of the world. Back when Ricky Gervais was doing The Office, like, it was really meaningful to have a commentary on like the power structure of an office. But now we've had that. We've moved the culture forward. The point of the culture that we are at now is to understand how people of different marginalized identities are failing this. And I think there's still a lot of issues like and challenges in race relations. And I think that, you know, race, like comedy of like with race as the topic, it still has and will always have a really strong place in the culture. People like Dave Chappelle. But that's the thing that I wish Dave Chappelle would go back to, is like going back to making really amazing comedy about the nature of race in America. Part of me thinks that he's actually found in a weird way too much privilege, where now he's at the point where he is very personally well off, where he has a lot of his own money, he has a lot of his own, you know, wealth and privilege, that it's harder for him to connect with a lot of the experiences that were formative in his early comedy days, right? When he wasn't this big name and he had to like draw on these experiences as a Black individual to make really great comedy. Now he doesn't have that. So what does he have? Well, he's got trans people as a very convenient punching bag, and he's leaning on that, you know? So
well, do you think that that's a trap that every comedian is going to fall into if they become successful, or particularly like someone who's built their comedy around being edgy? Is now they're in a place of privilege, they can't really pull on like personal stories of struggles that they're dealing with, because they don't really have a lot of struggles. So they're trying to be edgy in other ways by like punching down at people.
No, I like Anthony Jeselnik is a really great comedian that people should find if they want to see how a comedian navigates dark, edgy comedy. Even like Anthony Jeselnik, the other one is Jimmy Carr in the UK.
Yeah.
Like these comedians, they make really, really dark jokes, really edgy, dark jokes, and they largely don't get canceled. Like, and the reason why they don't get canceled is because they are very clearly not preaching. I think when I think about Anthony Jeselnik and Jimmy Carr, is they are not trying to tell you. In fact, they are very well aware that the things that they are saying are horrendously terrible things. Like they know that they're saying like revolting, terrible, edgy humor, like, and it's so bad. They know how bad it is what they're saying. And it's because they know how bad it is, they can lean into that. And that is where the comedy comes from, is they are able to lean into the horrendousness of what they're saying as a joke. But people like, you know, I keep going to Ricky Gervais and Matt Rife, Dave Chappelle. The challenge with these people is they've made their careers not as joke tellers, but as truth tellers. Right? That's the way, like their comedy is grounded in, I'm telling you the truth of this fucked up reality that we lived in. This is the truth. Right. And so now they're coming in and they're not telling truth anymore. Now they're just like giving you like a myopic version of what they see as a privileged individual. Yeah. Right? That is not true for everyone else.
Well, and I'm curious to know your thoughts about Jerry Seinfeld, because he has built a career kind of on observational comedy. I guess you could call it truth telling, but it wasn't like, a lot of it wasn't edgy. It wasn't about people. It was, you know, what's the deal with corn nuts or something like that, right? Like, it was more funny voices talking about everyday occurrences and just making them silly. But he's also sort of taken this position that PC culture is ruining comedy, and I'm curious to know, when he has the ability to tell jokes that are funny without insulting people, why is he still taking a position like that, do you think?
I mean, I think for someone like Jerry Seinfeld, who is just such an institution, like in and of himself, like, and this is why it's so hard, because Jerry Seinfeld, as far as the craft goes, is such a phenomenal comedian in the craft, right? His ability to like see the comedy and the timing. And I think what Jerry Seinfeld really shows is like, you don't need to give a grand commentary on race and gender to be funny, right? You can just tell silly jokes, and like those are great, and we need that kind of comedy to some degree. Like sometimes we need comedy that's just an escape to help us see like the silly joy in living day-to-day life. But I think with someone like Jerry Seinfeld, it's like, it's the crowd that he runs in, right? Like he's still very much like a cis white man. Like his connections in the comedy world are like cis white men. Like it's that's his crowd, right? And I don't think of people as like being particularly necessarily like enlightened at that. I think one of the biggest problems that we've fallen into as a society is we've started to assume that just because people are funny or have a voice that they are also like informed and intelligent on every topic. And this is like when people are like, oh, but Jerry Seinfeld says this. I'm like, what? And why the fuck do I care what Jerry Seinfeld? Like, what? Like, what? Like academic credentials? Like, what? Like, what is the PhD that Jerry Seinfeld has in like the particular topic that he like in PC woke comedy that he can like give me an informed opinion on how peace? Like, has he written a dissertation on this? Does he have sources? Like, no, it's just vibes. He's going off of vibes. He's going off of vibes from his friends because his friends are in the comedy club and his friends are like shit talking. Oh, I went up on stage at a college and I bombed because I told a bad race joke and this I can't, you know, like like
yeah. Well, and when someone is disrespectful, whether it's like in their personal life or in their comedy and they're a public figure, like a comedian, do you think that people can or should be canceled?
I'm hesitant to say because I don't believe necessarily in canceling as a mechanism for justice. Like, I think canceling is
well, I question what canceling even means, right?
Yeah, I question what canceling is.
Losing interest in what you're doing, isn't it? It's not.
Yeah.
Like, you can't just go, I'm going to cancel this person, and suddenly everyone else is no longer listening to them. Or, I mean, I guess you could say maybe like a media organization or a network isn't going to platform you anymore. But is that canceling you, or is that just them going, we have better options out there?
Yeah, and see, this is why when comedians and people in power talk about cancel culture, it's so disorienting to me, because if you think about the people who actually die to the impacts of cancel culture, it's typically like trans people. Like, trans people actually die to the impacts of cancel culture. Oftentimes internally we cancel ourselves a lot, and not to say that we don't cancel like people like, I know you personally have experienced the canceling of J.K. Rowling, or the attempted ways in which J.K. Rowling tries to cancel people or tries to target people, right? That's coming from a position of power. Like, that is actually like physically hurtful. Like, it can create real lasting physical harm. It can create real lasting economic damage that can really impact like someone's livelihood and well-being. But like Dave Chappelle, when he was the joke he made, like, oh, they've canceled people bigger than me, they got J.K. Rowling. I'm like, J.K. Rowling is worth like how many billion? I would love to be canceled. Fuck, like like if you want to cancel me and by the end of my canceling I am still worth like $2 billion, like, I've not been canceled. You know, I that is not being canceled. That is a larger number of people have, you know, looked at me disfavorably. You know, and I think a lot of it is insecurity. Like, I think for a lot of comedians, I'm getting into like more my like psychoanalysis of like the psyche of a comedian. But I think for a lot of comedians who make their living on having other people be happy with them, like, that is our job, is to make people laugh. When they start to reach a point where other people are upset with them, angry with them even, coming at them on Twitter, and they see this torrential downpour of hate, like, I don't think that they know how to reconcile that, because the only option is either like, I have to admit that I'm wrong, which nobody likes to admit that they're wrong, especially not like someone whose job it is to make people laugh. Like, they're like, oh my god, these people are angry at me. The easiest thing to do in that situation is to just like, everyone who is angry at me is wrong, and everyone who likes me is right, and I'm just going to keep making fun of those. I'm not going to take any accountability because that's their fault. That's, you know, that's their problem. And then it builds, and then, you know, you get people like, then they all yes man each other. You know, this is the whole idea of the boys club, where Jerry Seinfeld, Ricky Gervais, and that whole group of people, they'll come in and be like, am I really that wrong? And of course, like, that's their friends. They could be like, nah, you're fine, bro. Like, it's okay. Like, don't worry about it. Fuck the haters. You know, keep doing what you're doing. I'm like, no, you really probably should actually like who's gonna tell you that? Can you imagine like a group of like 5 bros and one of them's asking like, hey, did I do something wrong? And 3 people say like, no, you're totally good. Like the 5th one is not gonna go, you know, I really think you should think about the impacts of your words, and you should really like contemplate how you affect like society at large. Like that's it, like I wish it happened, but that's not like that's
Peer pressure.
That's peer pressure. That's the whole idea of toxic masculinity that we're like struggling so hard against, right? We're struggling against that normative culture that boys have of just like reinforcing each other's behaviors because they don't want to get into conflict with their friends. You know, it's easier to just yes man their friends.
Right. And I mean, if there's this fear of being canceled, it seems like some comedians have this fear that they're going to be canceled, or that people are not going to think they're funny anymore because they're not able to change with the times, or they can't figure out how to craft a joke that's funny without insulting people. Do you think that that's resulted in the comedy scene shrinking, or are there other people that are able to make those jokes coming in and filling those spots?
I think the comedy scene is changing. I mean, that's my hope as a comedian, right? I hope to be part of that change. I hope that I am like doing my little piece to be part of that change. I think if you look at history and you look at people like Richard Pryor, and you know, Dave Chappelle back in the day, so much of that generation of stand-up, the real breakout talent, was people of color sharing their experiences of racialization and how power impacts them in such a meaningful way. And now we have, not to say, again, don't want to say that we've solved racism, but the current political moment right now that we are really engaging with is queerness, and to a larger extent, gender, right? To a much larger extent, gender. And I think that is the space that I aim for as someone who is young in this scene. That's the space that I aim for, is to be able to make commentary on these issues in the same way that, you know, folks were able to make commentary on those issues, you know, in the 80s, and bring light the reality of these types of things. And so that's kind of the thing that I strive for. I think something that's interesting is it is impossible to be a trans comic and not be like a little bit radical, because by very existence of you being on stage telling your experience, in contrary to like all the bullshit happening right now, like that is inherently a little bit radical. Even if you're not telling the most radical jokes, like just being on stage is a bit of a radical act. Whereas that isn't the same anymore for Black comedians. But it did used to be, you know, being a Black comedian on stage was like a radical thing. It was something that like you had to be a little bit radical to do it. And that's the evolution that we're kind of moving towards, you know. And I think to some extent, a lot of these comedians at the top, they are losing their kind of cool guy status, and they know it, right? They know they're getting old. They're facing their time is up, but they're so used to the fame, and they're so used to the attention, and they're so used to people loving. It's just a bunch of old asshats, like not knowing when to bow out, like not knowing when to take their like leave and just, you know, hang it up. It's not your time. Give the space to people who are hungrier and younger and talented and trying to like really do something, you know?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm seeing a lot of crossover in that mentality with advocacy work. Yesterday in an organization we were involved in, we were having a conversation around advocacy, and one of the things that I noticed is that people who are like just coming into it, who are young, who are radical, who are new to the scene, it's sort of new, shiny, they've got a lot of attention on them. And then you age and people kind of, they shift in weird ways. They either drop off or they sort of change their mentality, and people start not aligning with the type of advocacy that they're doing. They become dated, and it sounds like you really have to figure out how to change with the times, or just hang up your coat and walk away.
Yeah. I mean, like, it's hard to change, right? Like, and I don't want to like shit talk the difficulty and like the compassion in my belief system, my faith. I really believe in like compassion, even for people who are, you know, who do terrible things. So like I can feel compassion for someone like Dave Chappelle, right, who's done so much good work in his career and now is like struggling to like find out where he sits in that, right? I can have compassion to that experience. I can have compassion to the experience of like the difficulty that exists in like, you know, seeing yourself age and seeing the thing that made you important in the world is kind of leaving you behind because you aren't really as important, and now you have to reconcile with the fact that you're not as important to the culture as you once were, and like what does that mean to you? You know, what is your legacy? Are you still with it or not? Like I have an aging father who struggles with that idea all the time of like, you know, he's not able to do the same things that he used to do. He's not as important. So I can have compassion for that experience. But when your reaction to this reality that you're facing is to like grasp onto straws and to like, you know, start throwing trans people under the bus because it's the best thing that you can think of, because it's the only thing in the political moment that you know how to like, you know, will raise eyebrows, you know, it'll get clicks, you know, it'll get attention.
Makes you relevant again.
It makes you relevant. And I think J.K. Rowling is kind of in that boat where, like, I think she has very much found, like, the only way for her to remain relevant in the modern world is to, like, continue just, like, driving hate spirals in every direction. That's a whole other story, but, like...
It's almost like leaving some legacy in her mind is better than leaving... you know, a diminished legacy or something. Yeah, fizzling out or having her legacy only be when she was younger, something like that. I mean, I kind of relate to that in some ways. I'm not getting older yet, but, you know, I've been doing advocacy work for 10 years and I'm going, okay, there's new up and coming people. What is my place here anymore? But if your solution to that is instead of continuing on and trying to do the good work and trying to make people's lives better, you sort of flip the script and you go, well, in order to stay in the public eye and stay relevant in some way and for me to leave some kind of legacy, and I don't even know what a legacy is. Like, we were just specks flying through space. Like, what is a legacy? But if your reaction is to punch down on people and make other people's lives worse, like that's definitely not a legacy that I want to leave and that I would hope anyone would want to leave. But some people clearly do.
Yeah. Oh, I think that there's a very misguided view that a lot of these folks hold, where they see themselves, like they're in their own ego, have positioned themselves as these like radical truth tellers, right? Like, and they believe that they are speaking truth to power. And so they believe that they are on the right side of history. But the problem is, this is why when I say, like, why am I listening to Jerry Seinfeld, is because none of these people have, like, an actual understanding of what social power and oppression is, right? They actually don't have an understanding of, like, what is structural oppression, what is structural discrimination, how are systems in society built up for cis people that they are not built for trans people. Like, oh my gosh, one of my favorite comedians, James Acaster, opens one of his specials on Netflix by like basically shit talking Ricky Gervais and shit talking like these comedians who come out and are like, it's like, yeah, these people can't be funny about making fun of the trans community, because you know who has it real good? The fucking trans community. You know, like they really deserve to be punched down right now. Like they really deserve all the hate they're getting. And that's the kind of the brain loop. You know, they see trans issues in the media and they see like the left wing really pushing for trans issues. They feel that there are other things that are important in the world, that this is this isn't a real topic, and because this topic is getting so much airtime, they think that this is where the real power in society is, that for some reason trans people have all the real power because we're always in the news. And that's just not true. Like, we don't have the real power because we're all broke. We're broke as heck, right? We don't have structural power. We have like media representation, but even not all of that's good. A lot of it's awful. No thanks to y'all. Like, no thanks to
Cough, Caitlyn Jenner.
yeah, exactly. Like, we have shitty Oh god, I hate how Dave Chappelle uses Caitlyn Jenner as like a gotcha to be like, look at this rich, powerful trans girl. I think for like I saw that so much in like one of his specials where like because of the existence of Caitlyn Jenner, he feels like trans people are punching up because Caitlyn Jenner is like in his mind somehow like above him on the power scale. So trans people are as a unit are above black people. And like there's this weird like mental gymnastics going on that I can like kind of like see in a lot of the comedy that he writes or had written. I haven't seen like his late. I don't know if he's got one after the closer, but I watched some of the clips
anymore.
Yeah, I stopped paying attention because it's not relevant. It doesn't move me forward. It doesn't make me think about the world. You know?
Yeah. And I want to move into a bit of a discussion around DEI work because I know that that's something you do. But I also know at the beginning you mentioned that you wanted to have a conversation around open mics and the culture surrounding that. So like, can you provide some information? I haven't really been involved in many open mics, and so I don't really know what that culture looks like. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. The stereotype of an open mic is that it's an empty room with a bunch of comedians in it, and you get on the stage, you get your like 2 minutes, your 5 minutes, and you're just trying to make other comedians laugh. Like there's not really much of an audience there because like no one's kind of come to watch like open mic comedy because it's just a bunch of people like testing material. So you've got mostly the audience is other comedians, and the other comedians are trying not to laugh. Like they are actively trying not to laugh because they want to see you bomb. And so there's this mentality of like, prove to me that you're funny. Like, prove it to me that you're a good comedian, right? That's the gatekeepy, bro-y, open mic culture, right? Is this
Instead
idea
of lifting
like
people up, they're trying to tear them down.
It's very much like, if you are funny, you will shine. And unless you are good, that's the, you know, when people say like you just need to go to open mics and bomb 100 times until you're good, right? That is the energy where there is this culture in comedy and the open mic circuit that is very much about just like proving yourself. There is a very masculine prove yourself kind of culture in open mics, and that's why I say my open mic is the silliest and least serious open mic in Vancouver, because I don't care. I don't know how we've managed to turn an art form about making people laugh into a competition. You know, that seems so ridiculous to me. So in my open mic, like most open mics have a lot of rules, like, you know, come up with like 2 to 5 minutes of good material, get up on stage, do your bits, and get down off stage. You know, it's like, it's structured. It's very like grr. Whereas for me, I want anyone to get on stage. Like I tell people when they come in the door, like if you have one joke, like what's your favorite joke that you tell your friends? Like just in, you know, if you want to get up on stage and tell one joke and get off the stage, love, please. What's your favorite story? Like tell me about that funny thing that happened to you this week. Just tell it. Like I just want regular people to get up on stage and just share their experiences and realize the joy of making people laugh. Right? That's what I'm in it for. Right. I'm so much in it to see like just regular people, not comedians, who just like this funny thing happened to them and they want to tell someone, but they don't really, you know, have anyone to tell, or they've already told their friends, but they like need to tell, they just want to tell someone. And I'm like, yeah, get on stage. Tell me. I'll listen. I will laugh. Like I will love it. The thing I say before my open mics is I say that there's only one rule, is that nobody is allowed to bomb. And that's a rule for the audience. Like you have to support everyone that gets on stage, you know, laugh at, you know, things. If they're funny, you know, try to laugh, you know, clap, give people your love and your energy and your support, because that's what it's about. It's a community event that we're here to love and support and give each other energy. If you want to like actually get good at comedy, then, you know, there's a scene for you that you can enter. But I'm not here to try to get good at comedy or get other people good at comedy. I'm here to give other people space to just like make friends and like have fun, you know?
Yeah. Well, I love that rule too. Like I do a lot of public speaking, so I know that getting up on stage is such a nerve-wracking experience when you're doing it for the first time, particularly, right? And I mean, if I was to get up on stage and try to do comedy, I would be absolutely shitting myself. And I can get up on stage and give a speech, no problem. It's a different dynamic, right? And so the idea that you would get up on stage, to do this thing for the very first time and everyone's like trying to make it more difficult for you, I wouldn't want to be involved. And that's doing, I would imagine, a disservice to comedy if you're making people who want to get up on stage and tell their jokes not do it because they're too scared of the outcome.
And that's why a lot of these like open mic places, they don't make money, right? They don't build a community. Like there's no community building at like some of these open mics necessarily. Whereas for me, like it's commonplace in the comedy industry to you don't charge the comedians, right? Like the comedians are coming to perform, so they don't need to pay to be in the room. You charge tickets to the audience. I don't do that. I charge everyone that comes in because it's a community space. You're not paying to perform. You're paying to like share space with your friends, and the mic is open if you want it, right? There's no like grand performing. Like I'm not producing a show, right? I'm renting space for people to like hang out. But also there's a mic if you want to do some comedy. Like you can go for it. But that's what I'm doing. And that's why my community is growing, and I think it's why it's going so well, is because people are coming back because they were like, I looked at my tickets for the show that I'm doing this Friday, and I've got a lot of like people coming back after months because they're like they've got stories, they've gone and done things, and they want to come back and they want to like share the things that they've done, right, with the crowd, right? I love when I get like recurring regulars. How many regulars do you see coming back to open mics? Like none. But that's not like, I'm not doing a comedy show. I'm doing a friend hangout that just happens to have comedy.
Right. Everyone wants to come back and hang out with their friends.
Exactly.
So sort of switching into that DEI piece a little bit, what are some of the big challenges that you think society is facing that need to be addressed? I'm just thinking like really broadly. Maybe you're addressing them through your comedy, maybe you're addressing them through your activism, maybe it's through your DEI education work. But what are some of those big pieces? You've talked about gender identity being a big one these days. Are there other things or are there specifics around that?
I think the biggest problem that we, I'm a philosopher or something, but like I think the biggest problem that the problem that I grapple with a lot as an educator, as a facilitator, as a artist is the problem of humanization. Like I think we're losing the ability to humanize each other, and we're losing the ability to humanize ourselves, right? And this is why when I said earlier that like I struggle with social media, like I fight with social media, is because social media as a technology is grounded in the dehumanization of the self. You are creating a profile for yourself that is not you. It's not real. Like your profile is not real. Like that is a curated profile of the things that you are putting out into the world as a brand. You are dehumanizing yourself when you are using social media. You have to. That's the technology. That's how it works. And because so many people live on social media now, they have lost the ability to see themselves as full humans, and they lose the ability to see other people as full humans because they're only seeing the dehumanized element of themselves that other people have put on as like this performance of themselves on social media. Right. And then, you get the echo chambers where you have like echo chambers of dehumanized people of a certain like character, like archetype, and dehumanized people of another certain political archetype and of another political archetype, and they all just become like this hive mind of an amalgamed like proto-human being that is not like a real human being. It's just like this purity of like a pure ideology, and the further you stray from the pureness of like whatever ideology you're in, the less you are able to be within that like community, because you're not a real human being unless you're following like whatever our ideology is. And that's like a struggle we face on all sides of the political aisle. Like you see that problem equally on the left as you do on the right, the way that we have like idolized like certain ideas, and like, if you don't think exactly like this, you're wrong. And so that's the thing that I like for my comedy and my education work is very much about bringing humanity back into it. Like why I tell so many stories, why I share so many, like in my workshops, so much of my workshop is just like me telling personal life experiences as a trans person, as a neurodiverse person, as a marginalized person, to share the experience of like, yes, I can tell you about inclusion, or I can tell you about like what does it mean to be like, I can give you the definition of gender identity, right? But that is very different from me telling you that, you know, that feeling that you get when you just get like your hair freshly washed, you get your nails done, or you get like, you know, you got a fresh fade for if you're a guy, you know, you put on a freshly tailored suit. There's that like sparkly feeling that you feel, you know, and most people will like, yeah, I remember that feeling that I once got when I did the thing. I'm like, well, I only started feeling that feeling in my life when I grew my hair out and I put on dresses and I looked at myself in the mirror and I put makeup on, and then suddenly I had that sparkly feeling. And then I would talk to other people and they would say like, oh yeah, I get that, like when I put, you know, just like my suit on, right? When I would see that in media, you get like Barney Stinson saying suit up, right? That kind of like energy.
Mm-hmm.
And once I kind of communicate it through that lens, people are like, wow, that's a human experience. I'm like, I know. You also have one. Thank you very much. Like, come back again. Let's have a human experience together again. Right. That is the thing that helps people like understand that I am a human being. Like, I have a human person in this body, and you also have a human person in your body. The question I always ask people in my workshops is like, what gives you gender euphoria? Like, what actually gives you gender euphoria? And my favorite answer that I've ever gotten was from a university-aged boy, and he said when he can take all the groceries up in one trip, that gives him gender euphoria. And I'm like, that is the most amazing answer to that question I've ever heard, because it's so true. You get that, like, you drop the things and you just feel like the king of the world in that moment. That's the gender euphoria my trans mask partner feels when they carry all the bags and drop it down and they're like, oh, I'm such a tough boy. I'm like, yeah, you are. That's gender euphoria. And then that clicks with people, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And that idea of social media dehumanizing, I think about the mental health aspect a lot, right? Everyone's putting out this curated image of themselves on social media. And I try to sort of cut through that, because I'm on social media a lot. And I try to cut through that by saying, okay, here's me being vulnerable. Here are all the problems in my life. I'm not just going to share the good side with you, because I think what happens too often is people go on social media, they're not just comparing themselves to one person's curated image, they're comparing themselves to hundreds of people's curated images. And they're going, why is my life not as good as all of these people's lives combined, the best parts of all of these people's lives combined, right? And I think that's part of what takes away that feeling, because then everyone's chasing after, how do I make my life better? How do I make my life better? Instead of just pulling themselves back, turning the phone off, going camping, getting away from cell reception for a while, and actually living the human experience.
Yeah, this how do I make my life better? Live your life, I think, is the big answer to that question. Like, you have to live your life. And it's hard to live your life when so much of, like, I mean, as an artist, like, my material economic value is tied up to my social media, right? So it is hard to live my life without thinking about social media. It is really difficult, and I am in a process of like really trying to understand how I'm gonna navigate that truth. But yeah, when people like that mental health thing of like when people are comparing it, it's because you've stopped humanizing yourself. You've actually stopped seeing yourself as a human being. You've started to see yourself as a collection of brandable experiences, of marketable experiences. And you are not a collection of marketable experiences. You are a human being who has a cell phone, and you have been brainwashed by Instagram into thinking that you're supposed to have marketable experiences to sell to the algorithm, and you don't need it. You really don't need it. Please, unless you're an artist, like get off, disengage, unplug, deprogram. It is not good for you. Like every piece of research that we have, just watch Bo Burnham's Inside. like it is not good for your mental health. It's not good for your human health.
Yeah, and I think there's also like a balance to be had in the middle there, where instead of looking at social media and going, okay, what is the trend of the day, and let me turn that into this thing that I'm doing in my life, go, what do I enjoy doing in my life? And maybe I just share that with some other people. It might not get all the likes, it might not get all the views, but it's my real life experience. And okay, it's going to keep my social media a little more active than it would
Yeah.
otherwise be. Because like I work as a social media manager, and it's really difficult to find content all the time, and especially difficult to like take on a trend that I'm not that interested in. So like I did a trauma salad last night with some friends of mine, right? And like we just wanted to do it for fun. I don't care if it gets views. We had a good time. We did it. I put it out there, and if no one sees it, whatever. It was a fun time. We're not like, we don't always need to be chasing the highest views and the highest likes, even if we're going to be engaged in social media and trying to do that thing.
Yeah, I agree. And you did catch me for a second, because I'm very I have the very large tendency to get into social media doomerism, and you did catch me there, where you're like, it's a balance, and you're like, yes, you're right, there is a balance to be had. Like, for example, we wouldn't have had, here's a really good example of like the pros and the cons of something like social media. Gaza, we would not have the information that we have about Gaza without social media. We just wouldn't.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I think about the Vietnam War, and I think about the history of the Vietnam War. And yes, the Vietnam War went on for a really long time. And yes, it was atrocious and horrific. It was horrendous. But then when we finally started to get the images and the pictures, and we started to get journalism of it, it ended. It pushed the culture. It pushed society to really rethink about, when the Napalm Girl image came out, when the monk who was on fire, who I can't remember his name, the monk who self-immolated. It's there, and I can't remember his name right now. But when those images came out, they were so striking, and they grabbed everyone's like attention, that it forced an end to that conflict. But now, because we have social media, so desensitized, like all these graphic images have desensitized us, where now I think that the pull of like an individual horrific image is so much lessened. Like, we don't see one image and then like the world stops anymore, right? Like now we see like billions of images, and we're still struggling to stop the machines of war, right? And there's a lot of reasons for that, but that's like, when I say there's like a balance, there's pros and cons. Like, there's so much. Social media is such a wild technology that is like reshaped human existence. So
yeah. Well, and I think too, like the latest image that I can think of that was one of those, it really stands out to you, even in the social media landscape, was the Syrian refugee crisis and the baby that had died on the beach. And I don't think that was because of social media. Like, I think it was in part, but it was more mainstream media. Like, that was, people were still paying attention to mainstream media articles in a way that I don't think happens anymore, because social media has sort of limited the ability to share those things, right? Like Facebook in particular, you can't share news articles on Facebook. I think that was how I saw that image in the first place, was a media organization shared that image on their Facebook page, and then I came across it that way. But when it's just random people sharing things, and it all sort of gets promoted in the same way by the algorithms, it all blends together. And sure, it's horrific, but no particular instance is really catching your attention. There's not one thing that's making everyone walk out their doors and gather in front of the government buildings and protest and say, this needs to end, make a change, in the way that happened with the Vietnam War, right? Where people were activated, they were getting outside, they were protesting, they were making their voices heard, and they couldn't be ignored at that point.
Yeah, and the horrific reality of it is that people in power, people like, say, the Israeli, like Netanyahu, people like Trump is such a good example of this. They've realized that actually the greatest strategy to avoid the watershed moment is to just be so horrific that every day is a watershed moment, and that now you can't rally around a single thing, because there's so much going on that you can't actually find the point where like, oh, this is the thing that we're protesting, because it's like 100 different things and nobody agrees on which is the worst thing, and so we actually can't organize around the worst thing because it just never stops. The worst thing keeps happening, and that's such a even the flooding of media, the way in which like legacy media has like become so consolidated in like corporate and political interests that you can't post certain things, and the way that people can, like J.K. Rowling, I saw a post on Threads today, was like, someone was looking up J.K. Rowling to see the progress on the Imam Khalif lawsuit, and J.K. Rowling had published like 7 media press releases just like as a nostalgia bait for Harry Potter, and so like the top 7 news articles were all about Harry Potter nostalgia bait, instead of the ongoing lawsuit that she has for defamation, that she is currently being sued. She has manipulated and utilized the tool of the media to push her out of the public eye when it is convenient. Right?
Oh yeah, she does it every time there's a big scandal. She promotes something that she's doing, and then you have the other side of things with billionaires who have tons of power, like Elon Musk, just buying up a social media company and going, oh, well, now I can control the narrative.
Yeah, completely. Exactly. Well, fortunately, I have the hope that I think Twitter is gone in the next 2 years. There's no way.
It's quite a cesspool these days.
Not even that. Like, it's just like, if you look, I remember looking at like their financials for like a hot minute, like after when Twitter got bought out, and I was like reading the last I can't remember the forum number. I just like was like, how is this gonna? I went to business school for context, so like this, like I had this kind of lens on it. How much can he afford
to lose despite
wokeism? Yeah, exactly. How much can he really afford to lose, and not what he's losing now? I love the advertisers, go fuck yourself, and then they stop advertising, and he's like, you're boycotting me? That's illegal. Like, you told them to go fuck themselves. Now they are fucking you, and you don't like it. Oh, I didn't know the leopards would eat my face. Oh.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, recognizing that this podcast is centered around comedy, and we've gotten into sort of the weeds a little bit with
a little bit
everything that's wrong in this world, and I love that. Like, that's what this podcast is about too. But I want to tie that into comedy somehow, and I'm curious to know what your hopes are for the future of comedy, either as a standalone question or as it relates to addressing social issues in the world.
I want comedy to be more human. Like, I really do. What I hope for the future of comedy, and what I see in the future of comedy, is I hope that this new wave. Okay, my ask for the scene largely is that existing gatekeepers make space for people like myself and people with new stories to tell, that they make the space for young talent, that they mentor young talent. That is my ask of legacy comedy institutions and legacy media. Whether or not they actually do it, who knows, right? Like, eventually we'll become marketable enough that it'll be in their financial interests. But I do believe that there are some people who do actually see the value of keeping comedy is going. My ask of comedians, especially young comedians, or my peers, and especially other marginalized comedians, other queer people, other trans people, other racialized queer people, racialized trans people. I myself am half Taiwanese. My ask of us is that we don't trauma porn ourselves. Don't make fun of yourself. Don't use yourself as the punchline to your own jokes. I think if you really want to see what happens when you do that, go watch Nanette by Hannah Gatsby. I think that special really showcases what the problem is when you, as a marginalized person, make a career off of making fun of yourself for a long period of time. I want healthy comedians. I want happy comedians. I hate the stereotype of I can only be funny when I'm miserable. We don't need that. I don't want miserable trans people. I want happy trans people making other people laugh, making other people happy because they are happy, and they can tell fun stories of themselves and their lives and their human experience as a joyful experience. That's what I ask of my peers, and why I create the space that I create, because I really hate when our comedy has to come at the expense of our misery.
Yeah. Yeah. And that ties into one of the questions that I ask as I'm getting near the end of all of these podcasts, which is what can our audience do to help achieve that future?
Go to see my comedy show. I was gonna say just
plug it up.
go see local comedy in general. But like it's hard for me to say go see local comedy because I know there's so much bad local comedy. But support local community arts. Doesn't need to be comedy, but like go and read stories from people in your local community, buy books written by local authors. One of the biggest challenges that as artists we face now is that the consolidation of social media and the media landscape has made it such a winner takes all market, and it's so easy to just like read what's popular and read the like go and buy like watch what's on Netflix, watch what's on this. It's a lot harder to like go out to a local show, to go buy a book from a local author that maybe's only printed like 1,000 books. Go to a reading in your like neighborhood, go find out where they're doing like poetry readings or the people around you. Like connect with your community, connect with the people around you. That's my ask for like how can we make the world a better place. It's like you need to start small. You need to like realize that the world is already a really amazing place. If you actually just go and live in it and with it, you'll see that people are sharing art and they are creating things. They are living a human experience, and that's a beautiful thing.
Absolutely. Is there anything else that we haven't talked about yet throughout this episode that you think would be really important to mention before we wrap things up?
Come to my comedy show. Stop treating celebrities as if they have knowledge. They have skills. Being good at acting means you're really good at acting. Being good at comedy means you're really good at comedy. It does not mean that you know anything about politics. It does not mean that you know anything.
Celebrities know better than you are.
Oh my gosh. Don't stop idolizing. Just because someone has a platform doesn't mean they are a voice worth listening to. Read books. That's the big one. Read books. Please read books. Please read books.
Maybe skip Harry Potter.
Skip Harry Potter. I was gonna say read non-fiction, but read fiction too. Read books that like expand your worldview. Read things that are gonna challenge you in new ways and make you think of things in like new perspectives. Be open, right? Lose your ego as much as you can. Every day I try to like I meditate a lot, and every day for me is an exercise of like what is the ego that I need to like let go of today. I am like right now I'm in the process of letting go of my attachment to being off social media, and now I have to like come to terms with like this is just reality. I can't keep thinking like I'm holier than thou because I don't go on social media, right? I have to just engage with reality. Like I'm living in a fantasy. I know, I can't. I hate it. But see, I hate it. That's my ego. That's my ego talking. I gotta let go of that shit. I gotta move forward. I gotta grow.
It's a great way to end it, I think. And thank you so much for spending the time to have this conversation with me. I love comedy. I love having conversations about comedy. I love having conversations with you. So it's been a great episode. And this has been a social justice podcast. I'm your host, NICOLA SPURLING, and today I've been joined by Ky Sargeant for a conversation about whether or not social justice is ruining comedy. I'll catch you next time.
Bye.
You've been listening to a social justice podcast, an exploration of our world's social issues, hosted by NICOLA SPURLING on the traditional and unceded territories of the Kwikwetlem, Katzie, and Qayqayt peoples.